I'm a 25-year-old female and I had an experience about 4 days ago that I still can't shake. I was house and dog sitting for my boyfriend at the time while he was away on a backpacking trip. His home is in a semi-remote area at the bottom of a hill, surrounded by a few acres of property. The house is right next to the highway, across from a small rural neighborhood. It's an odd mix of sketchy and safe, the kind of place where the community is close-knit but people keep to themselves. Some homes are well kept while others are abandoned and dilapidated. Despite this, I didn't feel unsafe watching my boyfriend's property and his dog, Hennessy. Hennessy is a 115-pound jet black American Bulldog / English Labrador mix, basically all muscle. Ever since my boyfriend and I started dating, Hennessy has become very protective of me and my dog, Lottie. Lottie, on the other hand, is a 57-pound poodle mix. I'm a dog groomer, so she's usually sporting silly haircuts with bows and everything. To put it simply, one of my dogs is very intimidating, and the other is not. Because of Hennessy's strength, I can't walk him and Lottie together, so I usually take Lottie out first and then come back for Hennessy. Each dog gets about 30 minutes of walking, and I prefer to walk Hennessy at night because I feel safer with him as it gets darker. 4 nights ago, I was about 3/4 of the way through my walk with Lottie when I suddenly felt like I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I looked around to see a tall man in a hoodie standing about 30 feet behind me, near an older, run-down house. The hoodie struck me as odd because I live in Northern California and it was early August. Even in the evening, it doesn't get cooler than 87 degrees, especially with the sun still setting. I tried to brush it off, knowing I can be a bit paranoid from reading too many "let's not meet" stories, but as I continued walking, the streets grew darker, and I noticed the man was keeping pace with me, always maintaining that 30-foot distance. If I turned a corner, so did he. If I sped up, he would too. When I reached the highway, I crossed just before a car was speeding by, hoping to create some distance. It worked, but he still continued to follow me. I walked as fast as I could back to the house, not daring to turn around, but I could hear his footsteps on the gravel. By now, Lottie had noticed him too and started barking and growling. I forced her to keep moving and finally made it inside, slamming and locking the door behind us. I hoped that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Moments after I locked the door, I felt someone trying to open it. The dogs heard this too and started barking furiously, as they always do when someone's at the door. My door doesn't have a peephole, but I can speak to whoever's on the other side. It's a pretty thin door. So I yelled out, asking who is there. Through the barking, I heard a man's voice say, "I love your dog, can I meet her?" The way he said it was so creepy, like he'd rehearsed it or decided beforehand what to say. I yelled back, "No, go away." He paused for a moment, then repeated, "I love your dog, can I meet her?" He started jiggling the door handle again, this time pushing against the door. By now, Hennessy and Lottie could sense something was wrong. Hennessy's hackles were raised and he was growling and baring his teeth. In a moment of panic, I threw Lottie into the bathroom and grabbed Hennessy by the collar, keeping him close to the door with me. He was barking like crazy. The man outside repeated that he wanted to meet my dog and I yelled, "Leave!" He paused again, then slammed into the door. I actually saw the door moving, and at that moment, I unlocked it and opened it just wide enough for Hennessy to lunge halfway out. He was going berserk, and my hand hurt from holding him back. I could hear his teeth snapping as he lunged toward the man. The guy clearly wasn't expecting Hennessy. He stumbled back, almost falling over, and cursed as he scrambled to stay on his feet. Without even looking at me, he bolted up the hill and out of sight. I managed to pull Hennessy back inside and call the cops. I never got a good look at the guy, and the police said there wasn't much they could do. They took my statement and told me they'd contact me if anything came of it. I'm so thankful for Hennessy. That night, after it all sank in, I snuggled up with him and Lottie and cried, realizing just how terrifying it had been. The next day, I went out and bought Hennessy the biggest bone I could find from a pet store nearly an hour away. He'd earned it. And, of course, I got Lottie something too. I don't know why this creep didn't get the hint when he heard 2 dogs barking inside. Maybe he didn't realize there were 2, or he assumed they were both like my fluffy poodle and wasn't scared. I'm just grateful he didn't have a firearm. Looking back, I probably should have called the cops and kept the door closed, but I hope that after meeting Hennessy, he knows better than to come back. If he does, I'll let my big sweet boy finish what he started. When I graduated high school in 2008, I was a bit lost about what to do with my life. I ended up getting a night shift job at a local convenience store, and for the first 8 months, I actually enjoyed it. My parents and friends were always concerned about the risks, like getting robbed or worse, but I never had any issues with anyone. About a year in, I finally had an encounter that changed everything for me. It was a pleasantly cool late September evening, around 2:30 in the morning, when the door swung open and a frail, skinny figure of a young woman walked in. I'll never forget her. If it weren't for her behavior, she might have even been attractive. She had long brown hair that cascaded down her collarbone, tan skin, and a nice figure, dressed in a tight-fitting, dark gray tank top. She looked like she was in her late 20s or early 30s, but it was her eyes that really caught my attention, and not in a good way. Her eyes had a blank, distant stare, as if she was an empty shell moving purely on robotic instinct. She didn't greet me, didn't say a word, even when I greeted her from just a few feet away. Honestly, I assumed she was high or something. She walked past the front counter and headed toward the household supply aisle. She picked up a small bag of cat food and then turned back toward me, staring directly into my eyes with such intensity that I thought she was about to pull a gun. But what she did next was even more disturbing. She approached the counter, still silent and still staring. She pulled out a $5 bill and some loose change, 3/4. It was a bit short after tax, but I figured I'd cover the difference myself later. By this point, she was really starting to freak me out. After I rang up her purchase, she didn't move. She just stood there staring at me without blinking. I tried to speak to her again, but instead of responding, she slowly lifted the bag of cat food and, with an eerie ease, opened it right there on the counter. I was standing in stunned silence, trying to figure out what she was doing. Her gaze remained unflinching as she reached into the bag, grabbed a handful of cat food and, without breaking eye contact, shoved the whole handful into her mouth and started crunching away. Bits of cat food fell from her mouth onto the floor. I wanted to say something, but I was too shocked to find my voice. After what felt like an eternity of watching her chew, she finally turned and walked out of the store, still holding the bag of cat food. The next morning, before I clocked out, my boss pulled up the camera footage of the incident. He said he'd seen her before, but only once in his 5 years working there. He told me, though I suspect he was joking, that she was a crazy woman who lived in an old mausoleum at the city cemetery. He claimed the cops knew about her and would check on her during their nightly patrols to make sure she was still alive. That night was the turning point for me. I decided to enroll in a trade school, swearing I'd never work at a gas station again. Every so often, she still haunts my nightmares, standing there, staring at me with those deep, blank eyes, crunching on a handful of cat food. I never want to see her again. I have been a delivery driver at a pizza place that we'll call Pizza House for 3 years now. I wouldn't consider doing anything else. On a slow, rainy day, we received an order for delivery. At Pizza House, customers don't have to enter their name when they order, so when it's a new customer, the ticket prints out as new guest. We have a specific protocol for new guests ordering delivery. We call the customer to confirm it's not a prank, verify the address, and so on. At Pizza House, the drivers take turns with deliveries, and unfortunately this time, it was my turn. We have designated delivery zones, but if it's slow, we'll go outside our zone, as we did for this order. It was fall, so it was already dark outside when I approached the delivery address. The house was tucked away between two cornfields, looking abandoned with its sunken posture, caved-in porch, and broken windows. It was a red flag, and I should have called the store, but I rationalized it away, thinking they might just be going through tough times. It was a huge mistake. Always trust your gut. The drive up to the house was rough. Every pothole and lack of gravel made the journey as unpleasant as the sight of the house itself. The only light came from a dim porch light, which was fortunate as most people who order at night don't bother leaving their porch light on for us drivers. As I parked and grabbed the order, I noticed the customer standing in the doorway. I greeted him with a, "Hey, how's it going?" He replied with something basic like, "Good, how are you?" which put me at ease a little bit. I walked up to the porch, feeling the old wood creak beneath my feet. The customer then said, "Come in a normal tone. I politely declined, saying, "Unfortunately, we can't enter customers' homes, store policy." It was true, it's our policy never to enter a home unless the customer is elderly or disabled. "Oh, come on, it's raining," he insisted. I replied, "Sorry, I'm really okay out here." I could see the agitation building on his face. He finally took the food, and I asked him to sign the slip, hoping he would give me a tip. As he turned to sign it, I caught a glimpse inside the house, and there was nothing. It was completely empty. My stomach dropped, not just because of the emptiness, but also because I realized the porch light was actually a dim flashlight. Just then, I heard a woman's voice from the inside say, "Why haven't you invited him in yet?" The man snapped back, "He says he's not allowed to," and then the woman angrily shouted at me, "That's the dumbest crap I've ever heard." She then lunged at me, grabbing my forearm with her nails digging in as she screamed, "Get in the house!" I yelled, "Get off me," as the man reached into my pocket and took my car keys. Panicking, I managed to punch the woman in the nose and rip my arm free, feeling her nails scrape down my skin. I bolted, not knowing what to do, with the man shouting and the woman hurling insults at me. I ran into the cornfield and immediately lay down, trying to stay hidden. Then it hit me. My car had pushed to start and I had left it running. I just needed to make it back to the car. As the man and woman approached the cornfield, taunting me with snarls and threats, I knew I had to move. The moment they reached the first row of corn, I made a break for it, sprinting to my car. I didn't look back, but I could feel them close behind. I reached the car, flung open the driver's door, and immediately locked it behind me. Unfortunately, that didn't help much without my keys. The man unlocked the car and flung the door open, screaming at me. I quickly threw the car into reverse and slammed on the gas. They tried to pull me out, but thankfully, they let go and I sped away, hitting every pothole at full speed, not caring about the damage. I called the police as soon as I was down the road, terrified my car would shut off without the key. I didn't know it at the time, but with my car you can drive as far as you want without the key. It's once you shut it off that you can't start it again. I got back to the store about 10 minutes later where the cops were already waiting. I explained what happened and they went to investigate. Unfortunately, no one was found, and the only proof I had were the scratches down my arm. When I was a kid, we moved around a lot, and for a few years we lived in Detroit. The neighborhood wasn't great, and some strange things happened while we were there. There was a man in the neighborhood that all the kids called Crazy Joe. This took place in 1991 or 92. He drove an old, rusted-out boat of a car that you could hear from a mile away. Whenever we heard it coming or saw him walking around, we'd all run and hide. I'm not even sure where he lived. Whenever Crazy Joe walked down the street, he would scream and yell nonsense. He had long, matted hair and always looked filthy. One of the urban legends amongst the kids was that he had an imaginary girlfriend. They said he was once seen screaming at her and stabbing the ground with a large knife. I was 12 years old and babysitting just down the street from my house when I noticed Crazy Joe walking down the same side of the street where I was playing with the two kids. His wild eyes were locked on me. Not wanting to draw any attention to us, I tried to corral the kids into the backyard, but they weren't cooperating. Crazy Joe kept getting closer, his gaze still fixated on me, and he was carrying a buffalo-checked blanket. When he was about 15 feet away, the blanket slipped, revealing a shotgun pointed directly at me. Panicked, I grabbed the two kids, shoved them through the front door, locked it, and moved them away from the windows. He didn't fire the gun, and he didn't approach the door, at least not that I saw, since I kept us hidden. The kids never realized what happened, and I never told anyone about it. I think I was afraid I'd get in trouble. Kid logic, I guess. It's a wild story. I told no one about it until about a year ago in therapy. I live a pretty cush life now, and looking back on my childhood in unsafe neighborhoods, it's kind of a trip. I hate the name Crazy Joe, but that's what the neighborhood kids all called him. He was an urban legend that ended up being true to the local lore. We moved to another state shortly after that incident, and I have no idea what became of Crazy Joe. I'm a 29-year-old woman who has lived in a big city all of my life. But in early April, I moved to a medium-sized town about an hour away with my sister and our 4 pets. This incident happened about a month after we settled in. My sister was busy preparing her final presentation for her undergraduate art degree, which was going to be showcased in the city. She had to spend the entire day there, leaving me home alone with our cats and dogs. So in the early evening, I decided to take my 2 dogs for a long walk. We walked for about an hour, and as we were heading back, roughly 5 minutes away from home, I noticed a man knocking on a door about a block away. He seemed a bit off as he would knock, look around, knock again, then look around again. But he didn't seem dangerous, so I continued walking since I had to pass by him to reach the street that led to my home. When I was about 10 meters away, he noticed me and started walking in my direction. He was tall and slender, carrying what appeared to be a box of candy. He asked if I had any coins to spare, and I replied, "Sorry, mate, I only have my dog's poop bags. Have a good one." I was ready to keep walking when he suddenly stopped me after noticing one of my tattoos. For context, I have several tattoos on my arms and legs, though I'm not heavily tattooed. Since I was wearing shorts, the ones on my legs were visible, including a specific tattoo of a ghost woman in a traditional Japanese style. As he stared at it, he said, "That's a really cool tattoo. Would you give it to me?" I laughed uncomfortably, thinking he was joking, but he was dead serious, staring unblinkingly at my tattoo. He continued, "No, so you're just gonna let the maggots eat it? Such a shame. It would be better if a person ate it." At this point, he looked me straight in the eyes, his expression flat with a smile that seemed to be friendly but only made me feel more uneasy. He then asked for my name. Not wanting to antagonize him, I gave him a fake one, Regina. He asked if I lived in town, and I lied again, saying I was from the big city and just visiting. He told me he used to live there too, on the streets downtown, rapping on buses for money. Then, out of the blue, he started rapping about me, still locking eyes with me. He rapped about how pretty I was, how amazing my tattoos were, and in his rap he said my name was Lorena. I quickly corrected him, saying my name was Regina, not Lorena, suspecting that he had figured out I was lying and was testing me. He just smiled and nodded. He then asked if I would give him my number, I told him that my dogs and I needed to get home because we were expected. He pointed to a butcher shop a block away and suggested that we sit there while I gave him my number, assuring me it wouldn't take long. I told him I couldn't, that my boyfriend was waiting for me at home, another lie, as I was home alone. His smile faded slightly and he simply said, "Well, that sucks." I wished him a good evening and turned to leave, but then he dropped to his knees and grabbed my leg with both hands. He started caressing my tattoo, whispering, "It really is a cool tattoo." My dogs, normally friendly and calm, started growling when he grabbed me. I quickly pulled my leg away, wished him a good evening once more, and walked away as fast as I could. I took a longer route home to make sure he didn't follow me. Once home, I immediately took a shower, scrubbing my leg thoroughly, feeling gross after the whole ordeal. Fortunately, I haven't seen him again, but for a while after that, I made sure to cover my tattoos every time I went outside, just in case. One morning, around 6 a.m., I stopped at a Burger King on my way to work. I parked in front, got out of the car, and made my way inside. I always keep a level of situational awareness, and that day was no different. I didn't see anyone else in the parking lot. About 10 to 15 seconds after I entered the Burger King, a man wearing sunglasses walked in behind me. It was as if he had appeared out of nowhere, but at the time I didn't think much of it. I ordered some coffee and hash browns and waited by the counter. The man then approached me and asked, "Is that your car over there?" He gestured toward my car outside. Yeah," I replied. "Where are you headed?" "To the university," I lied. I was actually on my way to my job off campus, but something about the situation made me uncomfortable. I didn't want to reveal where I really worked. "Can you give me a ride to Watershed Drive?" he asked. Conveniently, this street was on the way to the university. I took a good look at him. He still had his sunglasses on, which struck me as odd. It was a cloudy morning and the sun wasn't even fully up yet. He was a generic-looking white guy, probably in his 40s or 50s, well-groomed and neatly dressed in a button-up shirt with a tan leather jacket. His nice dress shoes didn't suggest someone down on his luck, and it wasn't even like he couldn't afford an Uber for what was only about a 20 to 30-minute walk. And call me cautious, but as a young woman, I wasn't about to let a complete stranger into my car. So, I simply said, "No, sorry." He nodded, lingered for a few more seconds, and then left the Burger King without ordering anything. The encounter struck me as odd, but I went about my day as usual. Later, as I was about to leave work, the incident came back to me. I was headed to the university after work, and now this man knew I was a student there and recognized my car. A very distinctive electric blue PT Cruiser that stood out like a sore thumb. Paranoia started to creep in, and I convinced myself I was overreacting, but when I mentioned it to a coworker, they agreed it was strange and suggested I report it to the police, just in case. On the surface, it had been a mundane interaction, but too many little details set off alarm bells. I decided to call the non-emergency line, but I prefaced it with, "It happened hours ago and it's probably nothing, but," just to have it on record. I was sure they'd tell me I was overreacting. However, when I described the man in sunglasses, the dispatcher's tone immediately shifted to urgency. She scolded me for not reporting it sooner and said that she would send troopers to the Burger King right away. Though, she added, "It's probably too late by now." She told me to call immediately if I saw him again. To be honest, the dispatcher's reaction shook me more than the encounter itself. It's why I still remember it so vividly years later. I wonder if my description perfectly matched someone they were looking for. And I regret not calling earlier, but at the time, I was convinced it dismissed my concerns. I never did see him again, but I still wonder. I had absolutely no intention of sleeping in my car this night. I was out with some friends in downtown St. Louis, hopping from bar to bar, just enjoying the evening. But I lost track of how much I'd been drinking. By the time I realized it, I was way too hammered to drive. I didn't want to blow money on a hotel or figure out an Uber back to the suburbs, so I made the dumb decision to sleep it off in my car. I ended up parking on this small, mostly empty lot near the riverfront. It seemed quiet enough, no sketchy vibes, at least at first. My car's an old sedan, not exactly built for comfort, but I tried to make the backseat work. I grabbed a ratty sweatshirt from the trunk to use as a pillow and cracked the windows just enough for air. The streetlights above were flickering, casting a weird, eerie glow, but I was too tired and buzzed to care. Eventually, I drifted off. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a tapping on my window. My first thought was, great, a cop's gonna bust me for sleeping here. But no, it wasn't a cop. I squinted out the window and saw a figure standing right up against the glass. The streetlight barely illuminated them, just enough to make out the shape of someone in a hoodie standing way too close to my car for comfort. I tried to play it cool, thinking maybe they'd go away if I didn't react, but then they started circling the car, slowly, dragging their fingers along the glass. My heart pounded. They stopped at the driver's side door, and I heard them try the handle. Thank God I'd locked it. Next, they moved to the back window where I was laying down and pressed their face against the glass. I couldn't see them clearly, just this shadowy outline of eyes staring right at me. I didn't move, barely breathe, just hoping they'd get bored and leave. After what felt like forever, they stepped back, but I didn't hear them walk away. I stayed frozen, trying to figure out if they were still there. Finally, I worked up the nerve to sit up and peek out the windshield, and there they were, standing about 10 feet in front of my car, just staring and not moving. I don't even remember grabbing my keys, but suddenly they were in my hands, shaking as I started the car. The second the headlights flicked on, they bolted, disappearing into the darkness. I didn't stick around to see where they went. I floored it out of there, driving until I found a busy, well-lit gas station where I stayed the rest of the night, with the doors locked, headlights on, and wide awake. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Even now, whenever I drive past that part of town, I catch myself glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that figure again, lurking in the shadows.